So here we are, part two. I'm doing these videos outside the house. It's a nice day. I want to do them outside the house, or record them at least, because my wife is greatly distressed by what she's had. She's faced a huge amount of humiliation and discrimination at the hands of South Tyneside Council, and with full knowledge of Rachel Hudson during our process. Now, how does this all fit together? Now, the next stage, I'm going to have to tell you about something very bad happened almost 4 years ago. So, December 2021. So, at this time, I'd left Wealth Tech and joined the business that I work for now. That was a very stressful time, and I'll come to that later and we'll fit that part in. I was doing two jobs because I had to take a step down in salary because I was so desperate to leave. Every day was a balance between effectively the welfare of my family and the welfare of clients, and I'll expand on that a little later. So yeah, I dropped my daughters off at school as was normal, and went off to the office I was working at the time on my own, and then returned to. Well, actually, my wife beat me to it and was there anyway. The girls were seized by social services, actually illegally, because when we arrived at the school, Kim Simpson, who's representing South Tyneside Council, had actually engaged in an illegal act. He'd sort of manipulated the school into detaining us, because despite the older daughter making disclosures, the younger daughter had never been out of our care at night. Was always picked up and always expected to be picked up and look forward to it. And the last thing I had from her, she asked me to look after a teddy bear and leave him in the car seat. So we left him in the car seat. We put his makeshift belt on and so on. And so she was terrified. So when we picked up the school, we were entitled to pick her up. So they committed an illegal act, and that's a fact. So yeah, the other thing is very very relevant is um, my daughters are half Polish, so they're British and Polish citizens. I prefer the latter because I regard it as a more virtuous country. Um, I only wish I were Polish. Sadly not. But yeah, they were seized and they were taken. And when this process starts, you're initially in a very adversarial process because the people who seize the children are, are very much keen, because of the way the model works, to secure long-term care orders. So essentially what they do is they look at the age of the children and they work out the cash flows that can be taken. So uh, there, there was an age difference between them, but in terms of the younger one, potentially got up to 10 years, maybe more cash flows if you play it ruthlessly enough. Um, why is this? So what they do is they essentially work into a reverse engineered conclusion. So this is what we want, and then they build a case around it to achieve it. The judges know that they're doing this. The system knows they're doing this. Because if you look at the other side, look at South Tyneside Council, they are cash strapped. They've got a lot of debt. So in many ways, they're very challenged because they can't support themselves. They rely on huge financial social transfers to support themselves. So there would be, and I don't say this with pleasure, there'd be a lot of destitution without it. One of the great variables that the council can do to offset these things is to call on the social budget. So, you know, taking children is a major part of that. So they know they can get quick, very generous funding to do that if they seize children and take them through a legal process. And the other end, you've got who they trade the children with, which is private equity-owned institutions, fostering agencies. Often, the people who established the fostering agencies that before they were consolidated with private equity were in the same process. So it's a very incestuous industry. And so the other end is private equity want to snap them up, because if you think about it, if you know anything about finance, long-term government-backed, inflation-protected cash flows, children become cash generative assets, and they're very valuable in terms of how they're valued, in terms of the businesses that consolidate up these agencies. So essentially, children are being traded through, and vulnerable adults, through the court system, barristers, solicitors, and so on, through into the hands of private equity. So this happened to us. So Judge Hudson, who's accused me of harassment, and they've used this pretext of spray paint, which is ridiculous. Anyone who knows me knows I wouldn't damage someone's property. And last time I used spray paint was in the 1990s when I was working in land surveying, and that was only yellow spray paint we used to use on the floor. So essentially, you're putting this adversarial process, and I've got to include a lot of things very quickly. So I'll try and think how to do it. So we essentially were. Why do I think? What's in the context? We've analysed Hudson in other areas as well, but why do I think, use this term corruption and racism? So I'll focus on that in terms of our own case. So if you imagine, younger daughter seized, we weren't allowed to see her for 3 weeks. And when we, bearing in mind, half Polish, and when she left, she was greatly proud and enthusiastic about her Polish heritage. Britain is no ally of Poland, and we must understand that with history. Look at the Polish partitions, look at the Second World War. The declaration of war when Poland was invaded was nothing more than symbolic. Yeah, nothing was done to support Poland. What about the Warsaw Uprising? Look at that. And obviously, when the war was finished, Poland was traded away to Joseph Stalin. So the UK and actually Polish people were more of service to the UK than the other way around. So she's taken away 3 weeks without access to her language, one of her languages. And when we were allowed to see her, which is in some filthy, awful poppy field centre, a contact centre that they use, we were allowed to see her. But blackmail prior, a letter was produced that went through South Tyneside Legal Department, authored by Laura Skelton, that said that we could only see her unless, Polish was forbidden. So her mother, after 3 weeks, a Polish citizen, couldn't greet her daughter in Polish. Just before Christmas as well. Couldn't even say Happy Christmas in Polish. Think about that. 3 weeks. It's a long time to introduce an interpreter, isn't it? Judge Hudson knew about this, and we raised this as a concern. She was not the least bit bothered. So let's look at other instances of corruption. Paul Mahan. I went on to represent myself actually in this case because you begin to realise that essentially it's a game of shadow boxing. Legal aid and you've got solicitors, they know the local authority, they're all sort of professional associates, and it's just it's shadow boxing. Everyone gets paid. It doesn't really matter what the outcome is, providing private equity is handed to children. I quickly established they've been withholding key parts of the bundle against his professional code of conduct, and these included the assessment, because the children were actually initially placed into the care, whilst they thought what to do, of the safeguarding and deputy head of the school, who had engaged with Kim Simpson in this illegal act, preventing us from collecting our daughter, the younger daughter. Older daughter, I can understand, didn't want to come home because she'd made some disclosures. We understand that. But legally, when we turned up to school, we would do it. Skelton also, actually, then after the police order expires, we were then blackmailed and badly advised by a solicitor to effectively sign this this section 20, I think it is, saying that unless we signed it, it would look bad in court. But they're against us. So we were against you. So no one's for you. Everyone's against you. I know, we started to see that Mahan, with full knowledge of the judge, had been holding key aspects of the process, the parental assessment of the safeguarding officer of the school, who got massive conflict of interest, who had been given initial care, then eventually transferred to a fostering agency, private equity owned, of course, where one of them remains. There were also things that I pointed out that he'd promised statements from the foster carer, and he'd written to the group twice promising it, reneged on a promise, and then went on to he delayed it effectively. So the social worker Donna Grant at the time, who produced this parental assessment, they could dovetail it in. You could see the dovetail aspects of it, how it was correlated to do. So Hudson knew what Mahon was doing, that he was breaching serially his professional code of conduct. Another one would be so you're ordered to engage into a parental assessment with a social worker representing the local authority, who is of course against you and is working to reverse engineer conclusion of a long-term care order, which services the needs of private equity. That you then, so she goes through this, and so you're in a difficult situation because you know you're stressed and upset, and you've got somebody digging into your past that they want to do it in a way to harm you. And this is Grant is perfect for this, and I was reluctant to reveal something. I was quite cautious, and in one of the case management notes that was submitted to court, you know, via Christopher McKee, who was the principal barrister, so I guess Grant had given him the data. They accused me of falsely withholding the contact details of my mother. And ironically, my mother had died of lung cancer a few years prior. Now, you can imagine that was greatly distressing. And I'm just walking a bit now. And you say, well, they might not have known that. Well, strangely enough, had they have looked at the bundle, which is what they are supposed to do, when children are taken by social services, they're subject to a medical. And during this medical, which, despite us being accused, the older daughter, of body shame and withholding food, they were both had a perfect BMI, but during the process, older daughter disclosed that her maternal grandparent on my side, my grandmother, had died of lung cancer. So it was there. So it was a spiteful act, if you may. And I raised it with Hudson during the process, even in the final hearing, but nothing was done to issue any sort of censure against them. She just brushed it off as irrelevant. There were other key evidence, such as a diary we found from our older daughter, which contained a chilling threat against our younger daughter, that she was a bitch and awful and she would end up alone. This is highly relevant because essentially what happened here is she is alone. You know, they went to the same foster carer, and older daughter at the first opportunity bolted to go somewhere else. So she left her alone. There was a chilling ambition there, and she achieved it, sadly. It's very distressing. And we raised this and said these are of deep concern. Hudson dismissed them, wouldn't even let us use them as evidence, ordered the seizure of these notebooks. And we took copies, of course, and she knew that, and she was very, very rattled and angry. But yes, that's another thing that she inflicted on us. Another one would be, when you go through these processes, you have something called achieving best evidence. That's where the local authority post what they believe is their definitive evidence that they use to support their request for a long-term care order to feed the children into private equity. So in this case, they produced a statement by our older daughter, and the statement was never signed. There was no transcript from it. She granted a long-term care order on the assumption that the statement would be backed up by a signed statement. That was never produced, and we've challenged this, and Judge Hudson, Rachel Hudson, is obviously extremely rattled because this is a gross violation. And subsequently, actually in February of this year, older daughter contacted me, and she was quite distressed. I was in Carlisle at the time, and so asked me to come home. She was sat in our neighbour's house at the time. So I said yes. I rushed home. It wasn't easy to do so quickly because I was using public transport and a bike, so train and bike. So I rushed home. Wife did similar, and we met her and we had a meal in a public place on reasonably good terms, actually quite good terms. She said that she would been quite distressed with some medication she was being given. And we asked her about the statement and said, look, this is a public place, you can leave at any time, any signs of stress will be noticed by staff. We just asked her honestly, please just tell us the truth. Have you ever seen this statement? Did you sign a statement? And she said she'd never even seen it. So you start to uncover some extreme corruption here. What South Tyneside Council had done, with full knowledge of Rachel Hudson. So you can see why. And the other thing is now, they have stripped bare our younger daughter's Polish heritage. She doesn't even speak Polish. She doesn't even ask about the country. She's given up. She tried. So that's been eradicated. Cultural genocide, if you will. And these things happen because a fundamental part of these long-term care orders, which are needed by private equity to feed this grotesque industry, you have to bust the emotional attachment between the parent and the child. And Polish was a fundamental link to that. They do lots of other things. You can't say certain things. You can't say, I miss you, I wish you'd come home. They get very angry if you show the child pictures of the past. They actually coach the children. They tell the children, if your parents show you photographs of the past, they are trying to manipulate you. They do that, and they are trained to do that by people who also work for private equity owned agencies who train these people, social workers. These things do happen. They're not my imagination. I am distressed, but I'm not stupid. I'm not insane. There's another thing as well. Younger daughter, who the hat I'm wearing and the scarf I'm wearing are actually given to me by her at Christmas, albeit in care. So wearing it gives me a lot of comfort. I do like physical things, and I take some comfort from them. It's probably a downside, possibly a little bit autistic. And I was talking to somebody like that yesterday from the crisis team. And 6 months after being taken, she was still expressing the desire to return home, despite being told their parents are dangerous and this, that, and the other. And in the week prior to the final hearing, a letter was produced. All of a sudden, she changed her mind. The parents were scary or something like that. Well, I will actually show this letter. It's produced by the social worker who's against you, in this case, Donna Grant. And it wasn't signed. She was a bright young girl. She was capable of writing and signing at that time a letter to the judge. And when you look at the letter and then you analyse it with the statements produced by that social worker, Donna Grant, on this occasion, you see a huge correlation between the language used. Most notably, this awful social worker Grant, corrupt in my opinion, and this is one way I'll say it, uses the term, even in professional contexts, higher. And this was on this letter, higher. She even did it when she was taking part in hearings. That shows the calibre of this lady. Our daughter had been taught, well educated, taught how to use English and Polish very, very well. She would never use the term higher. She would say hello. It was a fabricated letter with scribbled crayons at the end of it. This is the corruption of the system. There are also some other things as well. Prior to this happening, there was an accident at home. Elder daughter had broken her arm at home. It was an accident. There was a fight between the two daughters, and to cut a long story short, older daughter was beating the younger daughter, and it was over a crayon, something stupid. And wife was upstairs, and I was sort of pleading and pleading and pleading. Put the crayon down. We'll toss a coin. One will have it first, the other have it second. No discrimination. She continued beating, and it got worse, and I had to jump in between, so I effectively used myself as a shield. Older daughter comes over the top of me, rolls on her arm, and there's a broken arm. So the break was very difficult. There was a break on the forearm, and there was a dislocation at the wrist, so it was very, very difficult. And she had to go through an awful lot, because initially the NHS here in South Tyneside botched it, but fortunately later on, a very talented consultant doctor from working out of Sunderland, put it right. But older daughter was immensely brave through the process. Great credit to her. Very proud. But anyway, we took her to hospital. We were on good terms. We all recognised that it should have been avoided. Tragedy, but should have been avoided. Nobody's fault. And this got bent now to me doing it. So we're trying to find something against me. And older daughter had seemingly gone along with that. And there is an angle to this because part of these diaries or journals that we jotters as South Tyneside Council wanted to call them is there was quite a healthy interest in a very popular boy at her school, and she'd been feeding lots of allegations to them, such as we wanted to kill her despite giving her 24/7 access to technology and so on and so forth. There was an element of Saltburn to this, but not quite as severe, I'm pleased to say. And these two children I feel desperately sorry for, because I believe older daughter greatly manipulated them, particularly the boy. Subsequently, emotionally blackmailed him in other ways as well. They had to go to the school, and I would do the same if I was them. It's not their fault. So this gets twisted, and I say, right, well, what we need to do here, some of these allegations are very, very serious. So I actually went to Northumbria Police 2 occasions and said, please can you, particularly the arm, investigate these allegations, because she was seen. She went to the hospital. The NHS are trained very, very well to spot signs of abuse, and parents bring children in with injuries, and very rightly too. So she was examined outside my presence. Because of the complexity of the injury, she took. There were lots and lots of consultations and so on. Never once was a concern raised. There was no other injuries on her body other than pertaining to this arm. And I said, at least if you investigate it, I can defend myself, because if it comes to it, there would be some kind of jury, and they're obviously, the UK are trying to phase out jury trials, and a very, very chilling and gyration to being a police state led by the wonderfully talented David Lammy. You think you can go back to Anglo-Saxon times, Henry II, and even Magna Carta to see trial by jury, and they're trying to phase it out. Isn't it chilling? But at least one would hope I would have been in trial by jury, could have then called consultants and said, and so on and so forth. Because some of the statements that South Tyneside Council have falsified, so one would be from an IRO, Angela Nolan, who is a vicious character, has now been moved into a different role, but ultimately linked some way or another to the recruitment of identifying children to snatch, essentially. And her statement said I'd picked her up and thrown her against bookshelves, and she'd broken her arm. Another statement came through from someone else saying I'd picked her up and dropped her, so almost like a deadlift and drop, which are kind of not true, because essentially you would sustain other injuries if that happened, even if I were capable of it, which I wouldn't want to do anyway. So then this is why it needed the police, and all these inconsistencies were raised with Rachel Hudson, and we and it was blocked, and they didn't want that, and they didn't want it because of the threshold, because effectively in a family court, no juries, it's a dream, trafficker's dream, no juries, by a judge that's spent her career in the system, by a local authority, behind closed doors, no juries, and it flips the course of justice, so you are assumed guilty before being proven innocent, not the other way around. And that really is true. And then we uncovered correspondence between the solicitor of Northumbria Police and Paul Mahan and his cronies at South Tyneside. And essentially what they said is we can't go down the criminal route, the police investigation route, because the foster carer had prejudiced the process. And essentially he was being advised to take it through the family system because of all the reasons I told, behind closed doors, threshold that's pretty much anything the judge wants it to be, and no jury and so on and so forth. So you can see where we're going with this. So these are the principal reason. There was collusion between Northumbria Police and South Tyneside Council. Also, when a police order was served, they took no account of my wife being Polish, so Northumbria Police didn't even show any concern about that she understood the process. Strong institutional racism. She went going back to South Tyneside when we were forced, blackmailed really, into signing a Section 20. Skelton and her colleague knew my wife didn't understand the terms, arranged for no interpretation from the Polish side to sign a document of that importance. Being pressed into it without no interpretation, I was having to try to explain some of the terms myself to her. And again, it's a council that's both corrupt and institutionally racist. All this was brought to the attention of Rachel Hudson, who did nothing about it. So you can see where these concerns are coming from. And yeah, essentially, they've never done anything to recognise the heritage. They keep saying it's the child's wish, the child's wish. She doesn't want it. She doesn't want it. So I keep saying, okay, then explain why. Prior to moving into your case, she was very, very enthusiastic and proud of her heritage, but then it just disappeared. But you're allowed nobody independent to speak to the child about their wishes. You're allowed to not. You're not even allowed to raise it yourself, because if you do, they say it's abuse. But you imagine the abuse they put my younger daughter underwent 6 months. She still wanted to return home, and they pressed and pressed and pressed and come up with this awful letter, unsigned. She must have gone through phenomenal abuse. And I think here we've got a problem with this industry, because the UK is committing mass psychological abuse of children to fit this model of long-term care orders to feed private equity and grow this industry, which is linked to private assets and ultimately linked to the Pisces platform, which I'll go on to later. So it's quite a longer one, this video. I'm sorry about that, but there's a lot of things to cover. And these are the reasons why, and this is why I'm being persecuted, because of the link between the two. I spoke, if you look at the other channel, at Gary Stockdale 171, you'll see that I've spoken about this coordinated coercion I've been receiving from the FCA and the local authority together, and they've used, when I originally stood up for younger daughter's heritage, they cut down access when I started to link what was happening in the WealthTech situation and the secondary objective and promotion of private assets and so on. I then got the original blackmail regarding the heritage, and our allegations of racism came from social worker Deirdre Ryan, who essentially produced a parental assessment saying your time's going down from twice a month to once a month because of these reasons. How dare you raise racism? If you do, you'll be further punished. But I think you can see why I raised racism. And I received further threats from her, an IRO called Lewis Anderson, who traumatized my wife on a care meeting when she tried to stand up for heritage. We've recorded all this. It'd be interesting to see if Northumbria Police try to delete them, because they'll look very bad if they do, because they are backed up, and what ultimately they're looking for they won't find. And yeah, the subsequent threats were essentially, if you continue with this WealthTech investigation, and also this sort of private assets and the role of private equity in the trading of children, then I wouldn't see the younger daughter at all. So it's been, prior to that, I'd received threats on a singular way from the FCA in terms of continuing my investigation into the conflicts of interest of them as a regulator and a prosecutor. So essentially, after I was arrested and released, first thing I did I've got no devices. First thing I did on Thursday morning was to I wrote a letter to John Dance's legal representative, I think it's Josh Hart at David Gray, and said I need to issue a statement about the WealthTech FCA versus John Dance case. because of this coordinated consortium, because it's got too far now. They're really trying to, and I do fear for my safety, so I needed to do it. So I wrote a letter and hand delivered it to him saying I want to issue a statement. I have handwritten that statement. I can't type it up because I don't have my devices. So I'm going to read out that statement in the next video and have some departures from it in context, and hopefully that will make things a lot clearer. So that's it for now. I'll be back soon.